So this is the first video of our new unit on cells. I want you to go ahead and write down this title, cell organelles, and the target. But notice that this target is a little shorter than the one that you have on your learning target sheet. I didn't write all the names out here, but find it on your learning target sheet or your unit plan. If you read this, it says I can name the main organelles and their functions. So what you need to be able to do is identify or name the organelles and tell me what they do. And we're going to talk a little bit about that now and go through the list that's on your learning target sheet. So jot that down and we'll go ahead and get started. So this is the list that you see on your learning target sheet. Most of these should be familiar to you, and I know many of you already know, can label them on a diagram because you did that for me or drew them and labeled them. A lot of you know the names but don't know what they look like, and most of you could not indicate what they did. So let's go and talk a little bit about that, and we'll revisit this over and over again until you know it, and this is our first run at it. So as we talk about these, I'm going to add a few notes about what each of these do. Listen to what I say, write or look at what I write and make your own notes and add to what I'm jotting down or what you see visually here. So let's talk first about the nucleus. Now the nucleus, as we all know, is where the DNA is stored. The DNA is stored here, but it's only stored in the nucleus if a eukaryotic cell. If it's a eukaryotic cell. We're going to come back and talk about eukaryotic and prokaryotic, but what a eukaryotic cell has that a prokaryotic cell does not have, the main thing is the nucleus. Well, this is the DNA, and you might have learned it in 7th grade as the brains of the cell. It's because DNA is all that genetic material that is so important, and that's what's passed down from generation to generation. So you make some clear connections to this DNA, genetics, and evolution, which we just talked about, we just wrapped up. Alright, so that's the nucleus. The ribosome is what makes protein. And that protein is made according to instructions that came from the DNA inside the nucleus of eukaryotic cells. So that protein is really the thing that's doing the work, but the instructions came from the DNA. But it was the ribosome that read the DNA, or something that came from the DNA, and built this protein. The mitochondria, or the mighty mitochondria, if you might remember that from middle school, this is where energy is made, or energy that we can use in the form of ATP, which we'll learn about a little later. And again, these are only in eukaryotic cells. We've got chloroplasts in only some kinds of eukaryotic cells, but these are the things that do photosynthesis. So really they make sugar and oxygen for us. The endoplasmic reticulum has two components. There's the rough and the smooth ER. The rough ER, it looks rough because there's lots and lots of bumps, but those bumps are ribosomes. And remember, ribosomes make protein. So at the rough endoplasmic reticulum, lots and lots of protein is being made. At the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, lipids are made. Now, you may not know what lipids are, but if we use the words fat and phospholipids, you might be reminded of some things, and we'll talk more about those later in the year. The Golgi is sometimes fully called the Golgi body or the Golgi apparatus, but the Golgi structure repackages proteins and other things. So I'm just going to say stuff. We'll define that a little later. Repackages stuff to be sent around and out of the cell. Lysosomes, I'm going to write on this side here, break down toxic stuff. So there's stuff in our body that's not good for us. The lysosomes break that stuff down. And the reason that stuff was there in the first place is because it was made as a byproduct, not intentionally, but as a product of another process, and our body's got to get rid of it. Lysosomes do that. A good way to remember that is lyso, sounds a lot like Lysol, and that is what cleans out our cells. The cell membrane is almost like the bouncer of the cell. It allows some things in or out of it. And we'll talk more about it later, but I just want to give you this word. It's semi-permeable. Permeable means allowing things to go through. Semi means half or some. So some things go through, and it is made of a phospholipid bilayer. Remember, phospholipids were made in the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and the bilayer refers to two layers of them. The cell wall, it's only in some kinds of eukaryotic cells, but the cell wall, and in some prokaryotes, provides the cell structure and stability. So plant cells need these. Plant cells don't have bones or skeletons. Cell walls provide that kind of structure to allow a tree to grow very tall. Vacuoles are basically like storage containers, and they store water and other things like that. The cytoplasm is like it's the medium in which all other organelles are suspended. So it's just basically the watery jelly stuff in which all the other organelles reside. The centriole, it creates fibers that pull DNA around the cell, which we'll talk about when we talk about cell reproduction in a few units. And the cytoskeleton in some kinds of cells provide structure. So cell walls provide structure in some cells, cytoskeletons in others. So let's go ahead and look at some of these organelles and label them. So I've drawn a cell here. This is it doesn't have all the organelles, but looking at this, and if you know and you can recall any of these organelles from what they look like, you know that this is a plant cell. And there are a couple things that I want you to do. I want you first to draw this as best as you can. You can draw it real big, so you have plenty of space, because we're going to label each of these organelles. So I'm going to go ahead and label them as I talk about them. This first line on the left is pointing to the nucleus. Remember, that's where the DNA is stored in these kinds of cells. I'll extend this line. Inside the nucleus, we have another component that we did not mention on the list, nucleolus. The nucleolus is where the ribosomes are made, which we'll talk about in just a second. Just below that is the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Remember, all these little, it looks bumpy, these little purple things are the ribosomes, and they make the proteins. So the DNA comes out of the nucleus as a different molecule, as mRNA, which we'll learn about a little later. That molecule will find its way to the ribosomes. Ribosomes read that and make the proteins that were based on the DNA that was inside the nucleus. So we've got some ribosomes on the rough ER and floating around in the cytoplasm. So our blue line here is cytoplasm. Just below that, it's green, it's got these little discs in it. It's the chloroplast. So this is one of the keys to help you identify that this is a plant cell. Over on the other side, we've got our smooth ER. It doesn't have any ribosomes on it, and it's helping with some lipids, making some lipids. Just below it is the Golgi. Just below that is the mitochondria. The large blue structure in the middle here is the vacuole. And just below that, this orangey line in the middle is the cell membrane. And you should always remember that the cell membrane is on the inside or within the cell wall. There's one more thing on here that I'm looking at right now that I forgot to label. And this, let's say that this is going to be our lysosome. And we'll talk a little bit about some other molecules that are made, or other structures, sorry. And then this one over here, coming from the Golgi body, we'll call our vesicle. And the vesicle is really what's going to carry the stuff that the Golgi apparatus is going to repackage. Remember, the Golgi sends things around the cell and outside the cell. The vesicle is the way that it's going to do it. It's going to put its stuff inside the vesicle. The vesicle is going to travel around the cell to wherever it needs to go or leaves the cell. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little later. And that's about it. So if you have all this down, you're prepared for class, you're ready for the activity that we're going to do next time. Okay?